I'm going to talk to you today about nature and some of its sacred powers and how to access them in your everyday life. At the core, I'm going to be talking about interconnectedness and our interconnectedness with nature. And I want to try and get you thinking about how to create your own, what I call a nature narrative, your own story about ways to bring nature into your own life, to help boost your creativity and frankly, to help us thrive in trying times like these and at any time. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here and what makes me want to talk to you about nature and creativity. So I'm a co-founder with my business partner, Chantal Plamondon, of Life Without Plastic, which is an online store selling healthy, eco-friendly, ethically sourced, non-plastic alternatives for everyday life and for zero-waste living. We're also an information resource for all kinds of things about living without plastic. We wrote a book, and it's a deep dive into the whole plastics issue and talks about the health and environmental issues and gives tons of tips and tools of how to live with less plastic. And it's also taken on a bit of an international life of its own. So if you happen to win the draw today, we're doing a draw for some prizes from Life Without Plastic and a couple of books. If you win the book, you can have your choice of English, French, or Italian. So it's now being translated into over 5 languages and more coming. So, I'm not here to talk about plastic today. I'm here to talk about nature. Although I think from my talk, you'll get a really strong feeling about why it is important for us all to live with less plastic for the sake of nature. So I'm going to jump into myself. I am a tree hugger, as has been mentioned a couple of times. Literally, I hug trees. This is me a couple of weeks ago, hugging one of my favorite trees here in Wakefield, just up above the village. And you'll soon learn from my talk that trees play an integral role in my impression and my connection to nature. I'm broadcasting to you here today from my bedroom in Wakefield. This is not a Zoom background. This is an actual magical little forest that is just outside my back door. And I am so grateful for this, to be able to wake up to this every day. And it's a huge gift. And I thought it'd be nice to be able to share it with you today. So I'm going to punctuate my talk with a couple of my favorite trees. One of them I'm going to reveal to you now and the other one at the end of my talk. This is a pastel drawing that my sister, Mala Marie, who's I think joining us from Vancouver, is an amazing artist. She did this of a crabapple tree in the backyard where we grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba on Queenston Street. And it's one of my prized possessions. It's actually on the wall just over here. And what you don't know by looking at this tree is that it's really fed and taught me and nurtured me all my life. It's probably the tree that I've hugged the most. And as a boy, I had a little wagon that I would drive around the tree in winter and in summer, and I'd create all kinds of scenarios. The tree was like a factory or a mansion or a palace or castle or a fort or a grocery store or a Porsche dealership. And of course, the wagon was a teal green Porsche 911 Carrera Cabriolet to go with it. And the crab apples from this tree, we used to have just these massive crabapple fights with kids in the neighborhood. And I remember one time getting hit right smack in the side of the head, perfect hit with a rotten crab apple. It just exploded all over. It was gross, but I still love crab apples. And in fact, I brought with me here, this is some crab apple jelly from that tree. And my mom, I think my mom is on this call too. This is actually my last jar. So I can't talk about nature without talking about my parents as well, just quickly, and because they really had an enormous influence on my links to nature. I'll start with my mom. They both grew up on opposite sides of the world, but both surrounded by nature. So my mom grew up on a farm in the prairies of southwest Manitoba, near a town called Rathwell. And she would spend hours in a clump of trees they called the willows, watching the birds and reading. As I was growing up, she always had a garden. She was always spending hours in the garden through the summer. And during harvest time, our dining room table would be just filled with the harvest. Tomatoes of all colors, zucchini of all shapes and sizes, potatoes, just the sacred bounty from nature. My father grew up on the other side of the world in the foothills of the Himalayas in the Souchong region of northern Bangladesh in a village called Purbadalla. And he had this at the time when he was growing up, tigers and elephants still roamed wildly even. And as a boy, he would spend a lot of time playing in the rapids of a river nearby and in the forest. And he was an entomologist. He studied grain storage insects, and he had a strong affinity for the ecosystem approach, which really affected me. This idea that everything is interconnected in nature, in a natural cycle of life and energy and inputs and output. So both my parents grew up with and fostered in both my sister and me a deep appreciation for the natural world. Nature is sacred. And I don't mean this in a religious sense. I mean it in the broadest, most universal, most inclusive spiritual sense. It inspires awe and reverence. And we in nature are, whether you like it or not, and can't imagine not liking it, but whether you realize it or not, we're all inextricably interconnected. Because you and me, humans, we're part of nature. And indigenous cultures have always known and understood this. And I've heard some such cultures describe that natural force that flows through nature as the spirit that runs through all things, including us. Nature is powerful in ways that may be difficult for us to comprehend because they can't necessarily be understood through our base senses. There's an innate power to nature that's much larger than us, and it also fuels our creativity. It holds boundless creative and life force energy, and these energies, I think, are accessible to everybody and anybody at any time. You just need to open up your body, your mind, your soul, and most importantly, your heart, I would argue, because I do believe that the heart is the heart of creativity. So this image is intended to convey that there are aspects of nature out there that we can feel, but not necessarily perceive or with our senses. So as you contemplate this image, I'm just going to tell you a little story about an incident in nature that deeply contributed to my belief in the sacredness of nature. Years ago, my girlfriend at the time and I were out on a boat in the middle of Sand Lake in northwestern Ontario. Very quick tangent here. If you really want to feel nature and the glorious feeling of freedom that comes with being skin to skin with nature, go skinny dipping in a lake or an ocean sometime. Back to Sand Lake. So we're in the middle of Sand Lake, lounging in the boat after a swim. And on the far shore, on a tree, perched up, way up high in a tree, on a pine tree, the kind of pine tree, the droopy one that you might see in, say, a Group of 7 painting, is this single, majestic, immobile, bald eagle, just standing there like a statue. As soon as we noticed it, as though it was just waiting for us to notice it, it opens its wings, spreads its wings, hops off the branch and goes straight down into almost a vertical dive right down towards the water, picking up speed as it goes, very, very fast. Then, just as it reaches the water, it levels out into a glide right across the water. It's about 2 feet off the water. Its wingtips just about touching the water, just like in the image you see there. It's not moving. It's moving, but I mean, it's not flapping its wings. It's just like a single graceful wave going right across the lake. And it did that for about 1 kilometer. It was about 50 meters from us, and we were just watching it in awe. And then it reaches the other side of the lake and swerves up, straight up, up, perches on the topmost branch of another droopy pine, and then just sits there again, going into statue majestic mode. One of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. And so you might ask, well, how did that affect me and how has it impacted my life? Well, when I think back on it, it made me realize that I can fly if I live from my true self. I felt like I was seeing this little piece of raw, divine, natural purity. And it was telling me, it was like, Jay, don't hold back. Just be yourself and you can fly. Simple as that. So it really touched me. So I'd like you to take a moment, think about a big nature moment you might have had and how it affected you and how has it maybe impacted and contributed to this nature narrative that we're going to develop. And the funny thing about that whole experience is now, when I look in the mirror sometimes and I see my bald spot, because I'm losing the hair here, I actually think of that experience. And I even, when I was back in law school, I wrote an article about this in the student newspaper, and the basic theme was, okay, I'm losing my hair, going bald, but I get to fly. So now, I'm telling you all this because I want to invite you into a little exercise. We're going to go into the breakout rooms again. And here are a few questions just to jog your mind, like that you can reflect on. For the first couple of minutes, just reflect on these questions. And then, if you like, take a picture of something around you that relates to your natural experience with your phone. If you don't have phone, no worries, just have an image in your mind and then share it with your group. We'll come back in a few minutes, about 5 minutes. And if anybody wants to share at that time, you're welcome to. So here we go. So is there anybody out there who would like to take a minute and just share what they were thinking about and how it made them think about nature, what is sacred to them in nature or an experience they might have had?
Hey Jay, it's Kelly Lee.
Hey, Kelly Lee, thank you for your song. That was amazing.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. I would share one that I had if no one's talking yet.
Please do.
I used to live out in Ashton, in the middle of trees, and it was just a very secluded area. And I remember, like, I grew up in Scarborough, and we used to look out and see, like, I loved stars, and I would look out and try to find like the North Star and try to find the different constellations. And it was one night I went out and all the lights were off. And of course we don't have any city lights that you can see. And the house lights were off. Everything was off. And I looked up and it was a clear sky and I could just see the depth of the sky. The sky looked 3D, like it wasn't like a drawing. And I just remember just feeling so small, and just really feeling my place in the universe because it was just so vast. So that I think that was maybe like 10 years ago, but it's just.
Was it like you could almost touch the stars?
Yeah, like it was so just like, it was 3D, but far, but just, you could see all of you could see what was farther away, what was closer. It was pretty amazing.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that very much.
Since moving up here now, I live about 5 minutes to the gate of Algonquin, and it's absolutely incredible. And probably one experience that blew my mind last summer was we were canoeing at about 5 a.m. and
magical time.
Yes, definitely. And we were approached by about 6 loons, and they all came up to our canoe.
Oh, yeah, loons. Oh, I'm totally right. Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. Yeah, loons have a special place in my heart, that's for sure. So I'm going to jump back in to my talk now. And I'm going to take you on a bit of a whirlwind tour of 3 sacred powers of nature. I want to help you think about starting to create your own nature narrative. And so first off, what is this nature narrative idea? It's essentially a plan or a personal story for bringing more nature into your life. Simple as that. And why would you want to do that? So that you feel more interconnected with nature and with all living things. And why is that important? I think because it breeds feelings of wholeness, calm, wonder, all of which feed into creativity in very important ways. So you bring more nature into your life and you're constantly feeding your creativity in ways you don't even realize because it's there simmering in your subconscious mind. So the 3 powers I'm going to touch on are 3, but they're an infinite number. Nature touches us all in unique and different ways. So there are all kinds of powers out there for you to discover on your own too. The first one I'm going to touch on is nature calms and heals. And this is one that I feel on a regular basis. So as you know by now, I have a bit of a thing for trees. And whenever I'm in a forest, I feel an automatic sense of calm. And I know it's constantly healing me by just reducing my stress level. There's just something about the trees, the way they just dance in slow motion. In 1982, the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries coined the term Shinrin-yoku, which essentially means making contact with and coming into and taking in the atmosphere of a forest, or more crisply termed forest bathing. I love that. And there's no magic to this. Well, there is magic to it, but I mean, it's easy to do. You simply just go out into a forest and walk, sit in it, feel it, breathe it, observe it, trees, the wildlife, just take it all in. And you could call it going for a hike in the woods, but it's a deliberate one where your intent is just to slow down, focus on the forest and the nature surrounding you. So what effect is this having on you? Well, there's lots of peer-reviewed research out there showing that Shinrin-yoku and other forms of nature immersion therapy, of which this is just one, actually do have proven physical and mental health benefits, things like boosting your immune system and decreasing your anxiety. So this is one simple way to access the power of nature to instill calm, help heal whatever may be ailing you, Just go bathe in a forest in a really deliberate, present, and mindful way. Sacred power number 2. Nature teaches and feeds creativity. Very appropriate for this crowd, for this day, for this 8th anniversary. I'm going to show you about how creativity in nature through the work of a friend of mine up here in Wakefield. Mark Walter is a land art artist, does land art installations. He's based in Wakefield and he's globally renowned. He's actually done a lot of work in the region as well for the NCC and beyond. The work you see in front of you is called Call to Creation. It was done in Wakefield back in 2009 for our Wakefest. And Mark describes it as an organic shape calling out to all creative souls. And his work it's made out of natural materials completely by hand, and it's interactive. Community members can take part sometimes in building. This one he built with his 2 sons. And what he finds intriguing about how the creation of a piece in a given location, it alters the ability of the visitor to perceive his or her own emotional response. He sees himself, Mark, as an actor and a revealer. Now, this piece is actually one that he's working on quite possibly literally as we speak. It's in Berthierville, east of Montreal, at the Chapelle de Cuthbert. And it's called Entre dans l'Histoire. He's finishing it actually today and heading back to Wakefield. And so it's enter into history or enter into the story. And it's a really good reflection of his philosophy behind his work too, because his works are very site specific and they can cause a physical or a sensual change to the rhythm of the site. And they invite the viewer in. So anyone who visits or takes part in just being around his work becomes what he calls a dweller. And they're part of the art. They reflect on the site, its history, their own path, and above all, their own feelings. So this is how nature influences Mark and his creativity through his art. What about you? Have you ever thought about how nature influences your creativity? It's worth thinking about. It doesn't matter if you're an artist or not, because it affects us all in some way. So now I want to talk to you about sacred power number 3, which is my favorite, and it's a powerful one. Sacred geometry in nature. Sacred geometry is a language of geometric patterns that appears to span all cultures, timelines, species, and it's considered by some to be the foundation of everything in existence when you break it down into its smallest parts. For example, even sacred geometric forms are found in DNA and atomic structure. And we're going to begin. We're going to do a little exercise here, not in a breakup room, all together, right here. I'm going to show you a pattern, a sacred geometry pattern, and I want you, and as I describe it, I'll tell you a little bit about it, but as I describe it, I want you to look at it, but try not to think about it. Just observe it and feel it. You work with your heart, not your head. And we'll go for there. So here we go. You might find, as you're looking at this, you may think you've never seen this pattern before, but somehow it might look familiar to you. If it does bring up feelings in you or emotions or anything, feel free if you want to write in the comments how it makes you feel. No pressure, but if you feel called to, go for it. This pattern is known as the flower of life. It's considered across many cultures to be the primary creation pattern of all life in the universe. There's research linking it to all kinds of aspects of nature, ranging from the proportions of the human body to sizes and distances between stars, planets, moons. And representations of it are found all over the world in ancient ruins and temples. For example, certain advanced civilizations such as Egypt, the Egyptians. So the idea coming out of these ancient civilizations and their interpretation of it is that it represents the cycle of creation by a fruit tree in 5 steps. You have the tree that makes the flower. The flower turns into a fruit. Could be a cherry or an apple. The fruit has a seed within it. Fruit falls to the ground. The seed becomes another tree. Tree, flower, fruit, seed, tree. Over and over again. Super simple, but enormously powerful if you think it as the creation cycle. So now I'm going to go deeper into another form of sacred geometry, which is very common and visible to the naked eye. And while it's simple in its structure, its potential symbolism, I think, is vast and even divine. This is the numbers you see down at the bottom are the Fibonacci sequence of numbers. And if you're a math-fearing artist, don't worry. This is super easy to comprehend. it's an infinite sequence, and basically the way it works is, so 0 and 1 equals 1, 1 and 1 equals 2, 1 and 2 equals 3, 2 and 3 equals 5, 5 and 8 equals 13, on and on and on, infinitely. What that does mathematically, geometrically, is to create the spiral you see in the graphic above it. And this spiral shape is found throughout nature in all kinds of things. I'm going to show you now a stream of images where this Fibonacci sequence is present. I'll talk about the first one a bit, but the others I'm not going to talk too much. I'm just going to let you absorb them because I think that's a huge part of it. So this is a nautilus shell, a side view of it. And in it, you can see the perfection of the arms of the spiral. So that's one. And I'm just going to cycle through these now and let you observe as we go. A flower. Seedbed of a sunflower. An uncurling fern. Pinecone. Trunk of an elephant. A hurricane. The double helix of DNA found in the genetic material of every single cell of our bodies. Galaxies, including our Milky Way galaxy. This is not the Milky Way. This is actually a galaxy with the very sexy name of Spiral Galaxy NGC 3344, and it's about 20 million light years from Earth. So as you can see, it's from the largest things in the universe to the smallest things in the universe. So the message here is one of interconnectedness. As you're developing your nature narrative, I want you to try and find ways to connect with nature in your daily, everyday life. And in that sense, try and bring some nature into your home. It's super simple. A leaf, it actually exemplifies that Fibonacci sequence of certain leaves and certain branches, a branch, rocks, moss, something that you can put before your eyes that you'll see on a daily basis that is natural. It doesn't have to be an actual thing. It could be a photo, an image, anything so that you're seeing it every day. Even if you're not thinking about it, it somehow goes, I think, goes into your subconscious, and there's some simmering going on that will help the creative juices and just, I think, help your life in general. So I said 3 creative powers, but I actually have a bonus for you. I have a bonus power, which is another of my favorites. Nature is hilarious. I truly believe that nature has an epic sense of humor. If you just look at the hippopotamus or the rhinoceros, or spend some time with some chimpanzees. And as I promised, I'm going to tell you about another of my favorite trees, which is one that I find just hilarious, and yet completely infused with sacred power. And that is the baobab. As far as trees goes, I think the baobab is truly in a category of its own. It's got this amazingly wide trunk and a super cute, tiny little canopy up at the top. It looks hilarious, I think, but that's one of the reasons I love it. It's so unique. And it may be funny, but as far as trees go, it is an absolute powerhouse. With that thick trunk, it stores massive amounts of water. It can last in dry, arid areas for literally thousands of years. There's one in South Africa that's thought to be about 6,000 years old. The leaves are edible, the fruit is edible, and in Africa, they're known as the tree of life. So with all of these sacred powers in mind now, I'd like to invite you to do some homework. This isn't going to be a breakup group, but just to take with you. Using your image or your photo from before, go out into nature and try and find the original inspiration for the thought that you had, the image you had, or the photo you took. And when you have the two side by side, just stop and reflect. Well, what does it make you feel? Are there any emotions that come up, any memories? Take a photo of that natural inspiration, and then if you feel like it, share them both on social media and tag Creative Mornings. Feel free to put an explanation or not. Let people just look at it and figure it out themselves. A little exercise for you if you feel called to it. So as I begin to conclude now, my firm belief is that we access the sacred powers of nature by becoming closer to nature. And by increasing or even just becoming aware of that built-in interconnectedness and allowing nature to be a default filter through which all of our thoughts, feelings, decisions flow. And that's why I think there's importance in creating this nature narrative. So it's always there with us. And I think we become closer to nature through three things: openness, curiosity, and love. It's about going back to being the child we once were, because children are open, curious, and unconditional loving, and they're just so naturally close to nature. So we need to keep our eyes open. This is my son Jyoti a few years ago, and he actually did say that. His mother and I think that at the time he meant it maybe more in the literal sense, that if you close your eyes, you'll die because everything disappears, but there's something profound to it. We really need to see and feel the natural world, not just with our eyes, but with all of our senses, and celebrate that interconnectedness. Like, go hug a tree. When we do that, we're really celebrating that interconnectedness by living with respect that shows we're as much a part of nature as any other part of nature, whether it's a rock or an animal. The fact is, we're all interconnected inextricably and always. So my parting advice to you is this: as you go forth and create your own nature narrative, keep your eyes wide open. In fact, keep all your senses wide open, and be like the baobab. Stand tall, open your heart, embrace your true nature, and make optimal use of whatever you've been given, wherever you may be. Because all of you are part of nature, so become a sacred power of nature yourself. Thank you very much for listening and participating.
One little single piece of advice that you could give all watchers here today on how they can reduce their use of plastic, or some simple trick that they can do at home?
Sure. Wow. Well, kind of in a general sense, just try and reduce your use of what we call single-use disposable plastic, things that are used just once and then thrown away. So that could be straws, cups, bags. Plastic packaging is probably the worst. So if you can buy food as much as possible without packaging or minimal packaging, that goes a massive way. Most of the pollution out there in terms of plastic is single-use disposable plastic. And that's a lot of what ends up in the environment, in landfills. That's a very easy, simple step to take. And it's a very visible one too, that you can, whenever you go food shopping, it's right there in front of you. Just trying to minimize the packaging and the single-use disposable ones.
That's a great one. Somebody says, don't buy water bottles. Yeah, definitely.
For
Water
sure.
bottles, pop bottles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was just amazing. Such a great way to start the my Friday morning.
Thank you very much.
I was wondering if you could maybe go into some detail about developing your nature narrative and what that means exactly, and what that should mean to an individual.
Yeah, it's a great question. I didn't go into any really detail about it, because the thing is, it's quite unique to you. I can't dictate how to do it, but I guess the basic guidelines would be just to go out into nature. And for me, it's a forest, but anything that touches you in terms of nature, and try and bring pieces of it into your life. The whole idea of the nature narrative is to bring more nature into your life in settings where it's not obviously there already. So a lot of us work from home, and we may not be able to be close to nature, but you can bring in images, you can bring in little pieces. Apart from trees, I also have a thing for rocks, and I have this massive rock collection that's been accumulated over the years, and it's a drag to move, but I love it. And somehow rocks speak to me too. Like they help ground, I think. That's what it is. Like it's more about finding pieces of nature that speak to you in any way, and bringing them into your life in a really more obvious way, so that they're in front of you on a regular basis. So even if you don't notice them, you are somehow noticing them through your subconscious. And it's going in, and it's just helping to ground you in ways you might not even realize. It's really as simple as that. There's no tried and true 1, 2, 3 steps. You've got to create your own nature narrative in your own way.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing your. Hi again.
Breakup together. Awesome. Hey.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insights about nature. It was really interesting, and I'd love to hear more when we're not cut off. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask you, now that we're talking more about people looking to connect or reconnect with nature in a way that they didn't normally or might not usually. Bringing it to life without plastic, do you think have you seen more of an increase in interest or curiosity about how people would like to change their relationship with nature and therefore like protect what they love in terms of reconnecting with nature and reducing their impact on the environment?
Oh, great question, Noelle. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't touch on it in the talk at all, but it underlies everything I said, that as you become close to nature and as you embrace it into your own life, you automatically want to protect it. It just becomes a natural instinct. So absolutely, through the work that Chantal and I have done over the past 15 years on Life Without Plastic, that is an absolute underlying theme, that as people become more aware of, in this case, their use of plastic, they realize the impact it is having on the environment. And the core pillars of the work we do with Life Without Plastic have always been the environment and health, and how plastic impacts both of those very directly. I mean, just quickly on health, there are chemicals that come out of plastic that go into our bodies. They're usually hormone disruptors and can very drastically affect our health, especially over the long term. On the environmental side, it's very visible, and it's really come about in the plastic context in the oceans, where ocean pollution is so visible, has such a direct effect on wildlife, and there's so much pollution that comes from land into the oceans very directly. So absolutely, we've seen a sea change. I mean, you've seen it yourself in the media over really in the past 4 or 5 years, how the plastic issue has taken off and become a global issue. We've seen a bit of a blip with the whole COVID virus thing, and the plastics industry has taken really despicable advantage of that to try and push back plastic bag bans and all kinds of things, and lobbying for massive amounts of money to increase plastic production. Obviously, it's needed for health purposes, totally understood, but they're really taking advantage of it. So I think we're going to see an upswing eventually towards more recognition, once again, of the importance of living with less plastic, of the environment in general, as people have had time to reflect more and see exactly how our environment has actually had a rest, as well as we have, in a sense, and how the incredible thing, I mean, I have family in India who live in New Delhi, and the air above New Delhi is clear. That's pretty incredible to see that. And sorry, it's just...
Okay, I cry all the time.
And the Himalayas, a friend of mine shared a photo of the Himalayas from from Kathmandu. They haven't seen Everest for years. They see it now. I mean, that's amazing. So thanks for the question.
It's really beautiful. Thank you.
And thank you, Noelle, for the lovely question. Jay, you know what I said this morning, if you're doing what you love, if doing what you love makes you cry, you know you're doing the right thing, or, you know, something down those lines. I'm just glad it was you and not me. I'm just teasing. So we have one final question from Simon Filiatro. He asks, do you have any advice, tips about getting closer to nature for people who live away from nature, example, downtown? And this is so true. And I know we're all, you know, gloating about our beautiful forest backyards, but that's not the reality for everybody. And we need to acknowledge that. So do you have any tips for someone who may be a city dweller?
Yes, well, thank you, Simon. Simon is very close to me, actually. He's for my family. Great you could be here. Great question. Yeah, and that's a huge, huge challenge. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in my life working in a cubicle in towers. And I mean, one thing I do is, as I mentioned, I have a rock collection. I bring rocks, I bring pieces of nature, wood, but images too. As I've said, like having these images of nature before you, it really, it's always there as a backdrop, kind of like a Zoom backdrop. If it's always there, it's affecting you in some way. So yeah, bringing pieces of nature into your life in that way, very direct way. I know I keep saying that, but other ways I think would be to try and get out into nature, even, or say you're working in a place where there just is no nature around, just move, just try and move, because moving is a natural thing. And it just frees up your mind. It frees creative energies. It gets your endorphins going. In a way, just by moving, I think you're getting close to nature. At least you're getting close to your more natural nature, which is not sitting in front of a screen all day. So you should really take regular breaks, get up, move, drink water. Water is a supernatural thing. You need much more water than you're probably drinking every day. And If you drink, say, a glass of water every day, every hour for the day, you'll probably notice a big difference in all kinds of things in your life. Those are some simple ones. It's a great question. I hope that
Well,
helps.
that's wonderful. Yeah, and
Thank
even
you.
in the chat, if you have a chance to check it out, there's a lot of great suggestions like living walls. That's got to be a good one. I think
Oh, very
Emma
cool.
from Urban Botanist can help with that.
Yeah.
Also, houseplants, of course. That's a good suggestion too. Anyway, so we're unfortunately out of time for questions. Thank you to everybody for joining.